West Hill United is a progressive spiritual community where how you live is more important than what you believe. West Hill United is a people, a place, an idea. We are a community living out of a progressive faith, striving to make a positive difference in our own lives, the lives of others, and the world. Join us Sundays at 10:30 a.m. or connect with us at any time.
Well, this is the point in the service where we get to share some extra wisdom. If it's not coming from the lyrics that we get to share together and the announcements and the sharing time collection of bits that people offer up, this is another opportunity to connect with something that's hopefully inspiring and affirming. So today's readings, of which there are 3, are sometimes followed, if you so choose, by a couple of phrases. I would say offered as wisdom for the journey, and if you feel inclined, you could respond with, may we walk in its light. So the first reading, António Guterres said this in a General Assembly speech ahead of International Women's Day on the 8th of March 2023, in reference to the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 5, to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Global progress on women's rights is vanishing before our eyes. The Secretary General of the UN, António Guterres, has warned, saying the increasingly distant goal of gender equality will take another 3 centuries to achieve. The second reading. Achieving gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls is about challenging the patriarchal beliefs, practices, institutions, and structures that drive inequality between men and women. It also requires men and boys to take responsibility for change, be engaged as gender advocates, and question the power dynamics in their actions and their words. An extract from UN's HeForShe initiative, 9 ways men can become allies for equal rights. The final reading. Male allies in the pursuit of gender equality and inclusion extract from the International Bar Association, an organization which seeks to contribute to global stability and peace through the administration of justice. So this is an extract from that. The gender equality movement has long been led by women as they vocalize the disparities they experience in education, the workplace, politics, and society at large. This movement is intended to push for the equal rights and opportunities for all women, backed by a wealth of data that evidences a clear gender gap in any field. To close the current gender gap and level up the playing field for everyone, we need to involve men in this dialogue to have a greater impact, keeping in mind that the majority of leadership positions in governments and companies are still held by men, and that these calls for change cannot be heard solely by women. While women continue to push for their rights, the inclusion of men as allies is a pivotal step toward genuine progress. For men to be effective advocates for women's rights and equality, acknowledging and understanding their own privileges is an imperative first step. In Colombia, the strategic integration of men into gender equality discussions has yielded notable instances of heightened female representation in key leadership roles and board positions within companies. While acknowledging the strides we've made on this arduous path, it's evident that we still face considerable challenges in pursuit of comprehensive gender equality. Offered as wisdom for the journey, may we walk
in its light. The TED Talk John McKechnie has chosen is presented by Elizabeth Nyamayaro. She was born in 1975. I mention that because I do bring a lot of historical figures to view, but she was born in 1975. And I'm just going to read to you what she has done in that short a life. She received a Master's of Science in Politics from the London School of Economics and Political Science. She attended Harvard Business School. She's a senior advisor to Undersecretary General and Executive Director for United Nations Women and the head of HeForShe movement, which you've heard about in the readings. Nyamayaro's first partnership for UN Women was bringing an actress and activist, Emma Watson, to be the face of the he or she movement. If you want to Google Emma Thompson and the movement, you'll see the speech she gave at the UN. Wonderful speech. I believe it garnered something like 2 million views within a very short length of time. Before she worked for the UN, she worked for a pharmaceutical company working to get medicine into developing countries with less barriers. She also focused on and launched a key women's initiatives, including Merck for Mothers. Merck was the name of the pharmaceutical company. A $500 million commitment to reduce maternal mortality. The Pink Ribbon Red Ribbon Alliance, which partnered with many organizations to stop the cervical cancer in developing countries. She's held positions at UNAIDS, the World Health Organization, and the World Bank. There, she worked to support public health initiatives in both the public and private sector. She has worked at the forefront of Africa's development for more than a decade, and she founded Africa IQ, a nonprofit organization that aims to contribute to Africa's economic growth and development. I'm sure you remembered her date of birth, 1975, and she has done all that for the world in that lifetime. So the film you're going to see is a TED Talk she gave in 2015. And whenever we're watching something back a little bit, it's relevant then and sadly relevant now. Some things have changed, but not everything. It's an invitation to men who want a better world for women. As of March 2016, when it came out, TED Talk had gotten 1,240,000 views within the same year that she did that. So if we could put the TED Talk on and enjoy and be inspired by Elizabeth Nyamayaro.
I will always remember the first time a girl in the blue uniform. I was 8 at the time, living in the village with my grandmother, who was raising me and other children. Famine had hit my country of Zimbabwe, and we just didn't have enough to eat. We were hungry. And that's when the girl in the blue uniform came to my village with the United Nations to feed the children. As she handed me my porridge, I asked her why she was there. And without hesitation, she said, "As Africans, we must uplift all the people of Africa." I had absolutely no idea what she meant. But her words stuck with me. 2 years later, famine hit my country for the second time. My grandmother had no choice but to send me to the city to live with an aunt I had never met before. So at the age of 10, I found myself in school for the very first time. And there at this city school, I would experience what it was to be unequal. You see, in the village, we're all equal. But in the eyes and the minds of the other kids, I was not their equal. I couldn't speak English. And I was way behind in terms of reading and writing. But this feeling of inequality would get even more complex. Every school holiday spent back in the village with my grandmother made me consciously aware of the inequalities this incredible opportunity had created within my own family. Suddenly, I had much more than the rest of my village. And in their eyes, I was no longer their equal. I felt guilty. But I thought about the girl in the blue uniform, and I remember thinking, that's who I want to be. Someone like her, someone who uplifts other people. This childhood experience led me to the United Nations and to my current role with UN Women, where we are addressing one of the greatest inequalities that affects more than half of the world's population, women and girls. Today, I want to share with you a simple idea that seeks to uplift all of us together. 8 months ago, under the visionary leadership of Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, head of UN Women, we launched a groundbreaking initiative called HeForShe, inviting men and boys from around the world to stand in solidarity with each other and with women to create a shared vision for gender equality. This is an invitation for those who believe in equality for women and men, and those who don't yet know that they believe. The initiative is based on a simple idea that what we share is much more powerful than what divides us. We all feel the same things. We all want the same things, even when those things sometimes remain unspoken. HeForShe is about uplifting all of us, women and men, together. It's moving us towards an inflection point for gender equality. Imagine a blank page with one horizontal line splitting it in half. Now imagine that women are represented here and men are represented here. At our current population, HeForShe is about moving the 3.2 billion men, one man at a time, across that line, so that ultimately men can stand alongside women and be on the right side of history, making gender equality a reality in the 21st century. However, engaging men in the movement would prove quite controversial. Why invite men? They are the problem. In fact, men don't care, we were told. But something incredible happened when we launched HeForShe. In just 3 days, more than 100,000 men had signed up and committed to be agents of change for equality. Within that first week, at least one man in every single country in the world stood up to be counted. And within that same week, HeForShe created more than 1.2 billion conversations on social media. And that's when the emails started pouring in, sometimes as many as 1,000 a day. We heard from a man out of Zimbabwe who, after hearing about HeForShe, created a husband school. He literally went around his village, handpicking all of the men that were abusive to their partners, and committed to turn them into better husbands and fathers. In Pune, India, a youth advocate organized an innovative bicycle rally, mobilizing 700 cyclists to share the HeForShe messages within their own community. In another impact story, a man sent a very personal note of something that had happened in his own community. He wrote, "Dear Madam, I have lived all of my life next door to a man who continuously beats up his wife. 2 weeks ago, I was listening to my radio, and your voice came on, and you spoke about something called the HeForShe and the need for men to play their role. Within a few hours, I heard the woman cry again next door. But for the first time, I didn't just sit there. I felt compelled to do something. So I went over and I confronted the husband. Madam, it has been 2 weeks and the woman has not cried since. Thank you for giving me a voice." Personal impact stories such as these show that we are tapping into something within man. But getting to a world where women and men are equal is not just a matter of bringing men to the cause. We want concrete, systematic, structural change that can equalize the political, economic, and social realities for women and men. We are asking men to make concrete actions, calling them to intervene at a personal level to change their behavior. We are calling upon governments, businesses, universities to change their policies. We want male leaders to become role models and change agents within their own institutions. Already, a number of prominent men and leaders have stepped up and made some concrete HeForShe commitment. In a number of few early success stories, a French leading hospitality company, Accor, has committed to eliminate the pay gap for all of its 180,000 employees by 2020. The government of Sweden, under its current feminist government, has committed to close both the employment and the equal pay gap for all of its citizens within the current electoral term. In Japan, the University of Nagoya is building, as part of their HeForShe commitments, what will become one of Japan's leading gender research centers. Now, 8 months later, a movement is building. We are seeing men sign up from every single walk of life and from every single corner in the world. From United Nations' own Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to the Secretary Generals of NATO and the EU Council. From the Prime Minister of Bhutan, from the President of Sierra Leone. In Europe alone, all the male EU commissioners and the members of parliament of the Swedish and Iceland government have signed up to be HeForShe. In fact, 1 in 20 men in Iceland has joined the movement. The rallying call of our passionate Goodwill Ambassador Emma Watson has garnered more than 5 billion media impressions, mobilizing hundreds and thousands of students around the world to create more than 100 HeForShe student associations. Now, this is the beginning of the vision that HeForShe has for the world that we want to see. Einstein once said, "A human being is part of the whole, but he experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest." This delusion is a kind of prison for us. our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion. If women and men are part of a greater whole, as Einstein suggests, it is my hope that HeForShe can help free us to realize that it is not our gender that defines us, but ultimately our shared humanity. HeForShe is stepping into women and men's dreams, the dreams that we have for ourselves, and the dreams that we have for our families, our children, friends, communities. So that's what it is about. HeForShe is about uplifting all of us together. Thank you.
Hi, today I'm going to share my personal journey with female genital mutilation.
I'm sure it's very interesting, but we're not. There we go.
Feel free to cry, laugh,
Don't listen.
cross your legs, or do anything your body feels like doing. I'm not going to name the things your body does. I was born in Sierra Leone. Did anybody watch Blood Diamond? If you have any thought.
Are we good? Actually, I was going to wait till the end, but I can see, and some of you looked at that, there was a very good chance that video wasn't going to happen at all. And the busyness back there, even now, and so I just want to thank them for the constant work they're doing with this. So please, if you could just thank the tech team. I want to tell you just a little bit more about the HeForShe. I wish I could have followed up on the different countries that she mentioned that are doing those things and see how that's going. Often things either blossom or they don't, so that would be good. One of the discouraging statistics is that at the time that he or she started, they predicted how many years it would be necessary to close the gender gap, and at the time, they predicted 257 years, which could almost make people say, well, then why would we even try? But they tried. And the Emma Watson, really very worth watching that. So they've often branched out in places you wouldn't think that would have a gender problem, but they've reached to, Obama signed on and some Hollywood stars signed on. They have a group called Male Allies Guide, where men can sit with other men in a group and talk about that gap. I wanted to mention, and this is a difficult subject area, but I wanted to mention that during my Bachelor of Social Work years, for the field placement, they stationed me at a police station in the GTA in a counseling room, a large room, and I was just to watch and observe two female counselors that were counseling approximately every time about 15 men. And the 15 men had done their time in jail for spousal or partner assault, and they were required to take this course together. And they would just come in after they would get out of jail, they would join the group, and someone would have finished the 12 sessions and he would leave. So the group was changing often. And I thought it was an anger management group to teach them how to not take their anger out on somebody. But I talked to the counselors, and they were the strongest, most colorful language, assertive counselors I had ever met. Blew me away. I was much younger. Blew me away, and I asked one of them, this is not an anger management? She says, no. They don't hit the streetcar driver. They don't hit a person in the park that's walking their dog. Who did they hit? They hit a woman. And it was not about anger management. I don't think anger even got mentioned very much. It was about their view of women. Their view of what, this is a very important sentence they kept with, the view of what women were for. They were undoing the idea that women were for something, particularly for them. And as they joined the group, the same as in many recovery groups, they were invited to say their first name and then why they were there. And so I watched these men from every walk of life come to their first session, sit in a circle around with the other men, having done their time in prison, and they would say, my name is Jack, I hit my wife, or I pushed my wife down the stairs, and the things, I won't even say some of them, but immediately they would say, but it wasn't my fault. It was her fault because she didn't have supper on the table on time, or she didn't stop asking me to do the vacuuming. Whatever it was her fault. Well, the fellows that had been in the course for a while had this hammered out of them. Women are not for anything, and they certainly are not for you. They are for each of themselves, each one herself. And so when the new guy would come on and say, yes, I hit my wife with a pot, but it wasn't my fault, the rest of the guys would, oh, no, you can't say that, can't say, no, wait, no, that's not the way to look at life anymore. I thought, what a clever way for them to do that. So their peers were chiming in saying, no, because they could hear it from someone else after having been exposed to these different worldviews of what another person is for. If we launched that thought into racial inequality, for a very long time, it was thought that black folk were for white folk, and that you could enslave them and shackle them and make them work for you, and that's half the wealth in the world was engendered because they believed that a kind of a human being was for them. I once had a book, I gave it to a pastor friend of mine a long time ago. It was written by a Christian minister in the South who did a biblical exegesis on some passages in the Bible, and he was imploring his fellow ministers and his parishioners to see the difference between the wording in the Bible that called some forms of life beasts of the field and beasts of burden. Beasts of the field and beasts of burden. And he was saying, beasts of burden, of course, are black people who are to carry the load for us. But God tells us to be kind to both, the beasts of the field and the beasts of burden. And he was absolutely sincere in that. He had them before something, for white, wealthy people, but he was at least asking them to be kind, which just stymied me. Reading from where I would read now, but that was very much the idea. And so what were women for? Now, this organization has been criticized and criticized and criticized. Deplorable language sometimes about it, and it's been criticized because, and there are different things. One was that it looked like men are still rescuing women. When you hear a criticism, okay, I get where they're coming from, but another one was that it was man-bashing, and she actually talks against that, so does Emma Thompson. And another one was that the speaker here, who was, eloquent and well-spoken and well-educated, did not represent the women she was talking about. And so the gap between what she looked like and what the people that are being abused looked like was too big. And so she has responded to that criticism, so has Emma Thompson. And so do we in the world when someone points out, well, that leaves out this. And it's hard to say, oh, come on, at least we're doing this, which is good, but to balance that all the way through. So I wanted to just bring up thing that's happening in my workplace, my larger workplace, and many, many places. If you've heard of the diversity, inclusion, and exclusion movement in workplaces to minimize and to erase the gap between gender, between race, between disabled and able people, all these dichotomies. And so the word often comes up about discrimination, but I first wanted to throw in the word intolerance. Discrimination and intolerance. Intolerance means a lack of respect for another type of person, another group of person, another human grouping that you have grouped together to be something other or else, and to look down on it. So intolerance, I don't tolerate that they should have the same level of equality as me. So intolerance is an inside thing. It's a feeling. And someone can behave like they're enlightened in this, but still inside. And we all have parts of us that don't tolerate something about some group or we don't do it well. I've often said a word, and I was careless with my word, and good friends will say, wait a second, they'll poke into it and say that's a slur, and another, and the temptation, of course, and I'll talk about that in a minute, is to say, I didn't mean that, it's okay, let me learn. May I learn to speak in ways that does not exclude anybody at all from what I said. So intolerance is the attitude. Intolerance is the what group of people, what kind of people, what have I even done to say what kind of people instead of just people. So that's intolerance. Discrimination is doing something on the basis of your intolerance to exclude or push away or lower or say they shouldn't have the same rights because of, and the list is getting longer and longer, because of their age, disability, ethnicity, origin, political beliefs, other beliefs, race, religion, sex, gender, sexual orientation, language, accent, culture, and many other grounds. And the problem with discrimination, of course, is that it isn't just hurting the people discriminated against. It's not good for any of us. It's not good for society to squish, to exclude, to put down, if you want to use a word, to bully another type of person. So Edward Said, if you've read some of his work on anthropology and sociology, he said, all representation is misrepresentation in one form or the other. Some way I represent another kind of group of people will in some ways be not quite right, or big not right. And so the learning curve happens to end that. And we stereotype. A stereotype is that I assume because I know where you're from, I know what you're like. Stereotype is, I know how old you are, so I definitely know what you're like. If you're disabled, I know, because I have a label that I can put on top of you and treat you accordingly, instead of finding out what that person needs, what that person wants. And so I read something from a place I've never read a single thing. Harvard Business School. I have never, ever read anything from the Harvard Business School, but it was so good, I bumped into it, and I just want to share this as we wrap up. They have studied people and their prejudicial, stereotypical exclusion of people by many, many surveys and watching people in their workplace. And they wrote, why do people resist equality? And that sentence even exists is a sad thing. But why do people resist seeing all people as having equal, as we talked about last week and the week before, equal human rights, simply because they're humans? Nothing else, no qualifications other than their humanity. And he said they came up with a study, 3 types of reasons why we resist. Number 1 is called a status threat. if a minority group makes any gains, then I'm a member of the majority group. I will necessarily lose something. If the minorities get more, then I will necessarily lose. The second threat, a merit threat. The implication that you're saying I only did well because I'm the gender and the sex that I am, instead of my own merit. Don't tell me I've done this all because I'm privileged. And the equality would say, well, I better look at that because this person has been not given those opportunities. So the status threat and the merit threat, and then there's a moral threat. I think I could have guessed those first two, but the third one I hadn't even thought of. The moral threat. If you say I'm privileged and that women do not have the same privilege as me, if you tell me I'm privileged, then I'm wrong. I'm bad. I'm part of a bad, horrible group, and I don't want to be. I don't want my entire group to be tinged with an insult. I spoke with a staff member from another part of the region who had done her diversity, inclusion, exclusion in service. And she said, I stopped listening after a while because the only message in it was, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're bad, you're privileged, you're lucky, we've got to end this. And that's all she took from it. So close the door, close the door, close the door, close the door. She said, I can't help it that I'm white. I can't help it that I'm a woman, which is interesting because there's another gap there too. But those three, status threat, merit threat, but moral threat, is don't tell me I belong to the wrong group. And if we have a gut reaction like that, what about the other wrong group that we're born into, what we are calling a wrong group? So they came up with 3 responses to this, and you know, whenever you're giving a talk like this, you have to be talking to yourself. You have to be like ruthless with yourself. And I don't see everything about myself that bumps into these things. So you have to tell me. You have to sidle up again with me and say, Scott, the way you put that or the way you said that. And as my mom used to teach me, or was it my dad? I can't remember. My parents in tandem would tell me that if you invite someone to tell you what you're off about, you better give them safe passage to do so. You better let them not be squished by, wait a second, I didn't expect you to say that. So I would encourage you to maybe do that to me. Like, come up with, say something so I can practice safe passage. If we want to be critiqued, give safe passage. So the three reasons, the 3 responses, and I do them. And if you do them, in churches I grew up in, and many other churches, they would have what's called an altar call. Are you familiar with an altar call? So, yeah, okay. So that would be at the end of the service when there's been a stirring message and we're all convicted and we need to think about it. You're invited to come up to the front and kneel down or sit down, and the pastor will come and pray with you about recommitting your life. Now, we had, when I lived in Florida, we had one person that came to every altar call for 2.5, 3 years. But in the Salvation Army, they call it the mercy seat. The mercy seats at the front. And we don't do that, but it's when we're considering these ideas to say, where can I learn? And so the first thing they say people do when they're confronted about unequal rights is they defend. They defend. A Google employee, after his diversity, exclusion, inclusion training, wrote a memo to the management. Gender gaps in the technology sector are not the result of discrimination, but because of non-biased causes, including that men and women obviously have different interests. Men and women obviously have different characteristics. For instance, men are extroverted and women are neurotic. That was the memo. And then, so the inequalities were legitimate because they were based on supposed real biological differences. So you women here would have been cast as biologically neurotic, and you can't help yourselves, and so we don't put you in high positions, because where would the world be if it was led by neurotic? You understand what I'm saying here. So we defend. That's not what it is. It's not equal. I'm not being equal. I'm being factual. I'm being biologically factual. The second one is denying. So defending or denying. And denying is resisting by downplaying the facts about inequality. L'Oreal, is L'Oreal like is that a cosmetic? Thank you. I didn't know because I'm male. No, just kidding, I should have known. Especially since I picked the quote, I should have known that. I don't understand why we need to attend these DEI sessions, one employee wrote in a feedback survey, because we're not discriminating against any employees to begin with. And then they looked at the statistics of who was in leadership and who was on the floor, and it was so denying. And the third one is distancing. So I can defend myself against what's actually bothering me that you just said, and I need to look at it. I'm defending it. No. I'm denying that there is a problem at all. And I've heard that from a distant family member. That's just hype, that's just a hoax, that's just a conspiracy theory. So denying. And the last one is distancing. And it really is saying, I won't say anything. I'm not going to do it. I'm not part of this. I'm out. I'm not going to be part of the idea. So defending, denying, and distancing. So we put our values into that. We put the values we talk about and that we hold to and that we want to live out. So instead of defending ourselves when we feel that prickle of conviction or accusation from someone, instead of defending, the recommendation would be just listen a little longer. Just hang in there and listen a little bit longer. So hard to do when you're bursting with the defense. You're bursting with so you look better, so you're not one of them. So listening just a bit longer. When we tend to deny that we do that, when we're denying the facts of that, and that's when a little more time with reflection, so listening a little longer to the difference, and then reflecting on how I live that out or don't. And instead of the distancing, our values would lead us to connecting. Say, okay, maybe I'll join a group. Maybe I'll watch something online. Maybe I'll do something to reduce the distance between me and that problem. Because what I'm really doing is reducing the distance between me and that person, and that type of person. So instead of defending, to listen a little bit longer. Instead of denying, take the time to reflect, because you'll only get richer, better, more loving, more expanded if you do that. And distancing, instead of distancing, connecting, engaging. So I'm going to ask you, and I've asked this before, how many of you, say, 25 years ago, were right about something, absolutely right. You knew what you thought, you knew what you believed, you knew the facts, you knew whatever. And 25 years later, you think a little differently than you did 25 years ago. I would just like a show of hands, just a little show of hands. If you think, I think I'm a little different on something, and we've often shared that in our sharing time. We've read something, and so instead of defending ourselves in something, we listened. And instead of denying something, we reflected on ourselves. And instead of distancing ourselves from a problem, we took a few steps in closer, just a few steps in closer. And that is all wrapped up in the word love. And as we always say, it's not just love for others. That used to be taught in many churches. Put yourself last, and it's all about others. And I love that West Hill, right from the start, said love, respect, and compassion for oneself. Love, respect, and compassion for others we know. Love, respect, and compassion for others we'll never know. And respect, love, and compassion for our home, the earth. And so love in action, instead of defending, can listen. And instead of denying, can receive and reflect. And instead of distancing, can take a few steps in closer. We only we only benefit from that growth, but so do every other person who's been unequalized by a thought, an idea, a stereotype, an intolerance, discrimination. So I'm going to ask Babette if she will lead us in the refrain from the song, What Would Love Do Now?
Become a sustaining champion of West Hill United's work by committing to an automatic monthly donation. Learn more or donate now through Canada Helps.